Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Thomas Jefferson boys coach Mark Gray-Mendes, who's Colonials. I think are you guys still the Colonials? Okay, so I know the college changed. Beat Edison last night, big win for them. Puts it over 500 for the year, I believe it's 7-5, coach. But coach, thanks for doing this. Great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. Well, coach, first of all, I when I was going through your background, I didn't know you were a fellow Wahoo, which is great. Yeah, you may have gone to the dark side briefly first at Tech before you saw the error of your ways, ended up at UVA. But tell us a little bit about your basketball background. I know you also went to TJ. You were class of 2003, TJ 2007 UVA. So tell us a little bit about your basketball background.
Sure thing. Well, first thing, let me say, it was my intent to go to UVA out of high school. I was waitlisted and never got off the wait list. So at my first opportunity, I went to the light side. But yeah, it's as far as my basketball background. I played a ton growing up. Obviously, a lot of house league ball, and then 8th grade I played some select ball. Got into TJ, played freshman and JV, and then 2 years on the varsity for Coach Ed Grimm, who was my predecessor. And early on, I kind of got a sense that the intellectual side of basketball was really interesting to me. And so it's actually a funny story. We were over, I think it was my third varsity basketball game. We were over at Lake Braddock, and they ran an inbounds play against us. And I think I got scored on 3 straight possessions. And so my coach goes ahead and subs me out. And I asked him, Coach, can we do something different? And he said, well, do you want to try this? I've been doing this for 32 years. And that was the first time that I actually thought about coaching at all. It's kind of an amusing thing. And then later that spring, Mark Travis, who's been a long time assistant, has been a head coach in different areas and at different sports in Northern Virginia, offered me an opportunity to coach the spring league over at West Springfield for his JVs. And so I did that and just found that I really enjoyed it. So for the next several years, finishing up high school and then up into college, I coached a lot of our off-season teams, which I know you've done a lot of in your time, and had a lot of fun with that. And when I graduated from college in 2007, Coach Grimm invited me to the staff. I was on staff for 3 years, and then I was presented with the opportunity to take over the program in the summer of 2010. So this is year number 14, and it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed it. But I've been a part of the Jefferson men's basketball program now for a little over 2/3 of my life. It's been really enjoyable.
Well, Coach Grimm is a guy that I know well. I used to officiate his games when he was at Paul VI. It's interesting because in Northern Virginia, we have different coaching trees, and there's the McCool tree. There's a Wickline tree. There's a Thompson tree. There's others. I don't want to leave anybody out. Well, Coach Grimm, Brian Doyle, and Coach Kevin Weirin and Kevin Roller, I guess, are from under the Grimm tree. So, what was he like to play for, and what are the things you learned from Coach Grimm that you still use in your coaching today?
Coach Grimm was definitely a guy who let you know that he cared about you as an individual, and that he was going to be invested in your development. He was a wonderful coach in practice, a great teacher of the fundamentals. He was a subscriber, not necessarily to the attitudes and methods of Bob Knight, but definitely to the way that he approached the game of basketball. Simplicity and execution, motion offense, man-to-man defense were staples, and he was a wonderful teacher of both of those things. And I think a lot of coaches in the region would agree that under his leadership, Jefferson was a scary program to play against because we could come up and bite some really good teams on any given night. He also had the difficult task of coaching in the Concord district for many years with Chantilly and Herndon and South Lakes and Oakton and some really, really good teams that we had to play against. And my junior year, we actually knocked off a few of them. And so I don't know that Coach Grimm ever got the amount of credit that he deserved for how great a job that he did with us. But playing for him was an enjoyable experience, and he and I have remained close since then. Just really, really good, solid relationship. I used to have breakfast with him and all of the other coaches that were on that staff for a number of years afterwards, basically up until COVID hit. So, hopefully we can get something like that back together soon. But Coach Grimm was an excellent coach, and it was an honor to take over his legacy.
Well, give Coach my regards. I remember him teaching, and this is back in the this is back in the mid 90s, a very physical brand of man-to-man defense. And I remember if you called those fouls on kind of like the way Duke would play, his guards would shoulder the ball handler. And that was pretty typical defense in the 90s. Do you think do you think you can get away with that kind of play today, or would the way the game is called now, it would be hard to teach defense that way?
I don't know. I think it depends on what crew you have on any given night. You know this enough from officiating and watching as many games as you do. Some nights, you can get away with a little more physicality, and other nights, it's going to be called very tightly. And then sometimes, especially nowadays with the new foul rules and getting to the double bonus after fifth foul in the quarter, sometimes you'll have a situation where it might be tight a little early, and then once we get to that fifth foul, it's let them play a little bit more. So you really have to take your cue in each individual game and see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I understand you're a baseball fan. At least you call the Bay Sox games. So I know you have to know enough about baseball to do that. I'm a big fan of Moneyball, the movie. A lot of people are. Are you, I guess in baseball, it's called sabermetrics, but are you the type of coach that does deep dive into statistics and tries to implement that in your coaching?
I think to some extent, yeah, probably not as much as my TJ background would suggest. But at the same time, I think that when you're coaching high school kids, and especially kids that are, at the level that we're at, you need to spend more time just dealing with the fundamentals and making sure that they know how to play the game before you spend too much time worrying about the stats. And, we do spend a lot of time worrying about shot selection and making sure that we're emphasizing shots that are likely to help us get buckets, and, allowing our opponents to get the types of shots that aren't necessarily going to be of the highest value. So we do spend a lot of time thinking about that, and strategically when we want to foul, so on and so forth. I think maybe I might be into it more than a lot of people, but perhaps not as much as I'd like to be, because, we have to spend time worrying about, again, making sure we have a press offense in, and making sure we can deal with all the different things you see in our district. For me, a lot of coaching is an intellectual exercise, and I like to treat it that way. And I think that, hopefully it's to our benefit.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you started at TJ, I believe you said 2010.
That was the first year as the head coach. Yeah.
Are you a much different coach now than you are then? And is that because you've learned a lot, or is the game continuing to change?
Most definitely. I would say, at that point in time, I think I was really relying on a lot of what I had learned from Coach Grimm, and also from the guy who was my JV coach prior to that, Mark Travis, and as I mentioned earlier, who's been on my staff along with Jake Boltersdorf for all of the 14 years that I've been the head coach at TJ. And between those two, I had a really solid foundation in terms of how high school basketball works in Northern Virginia and the sorts of things that can be effective. But I think one of the things about coaching at TJ is that the types of kids that you get year over year, you always have, nearly always, enough talent to be competitive, but you never have a steady stream of talent that all will benefit from doing the same thing. So you really have to be well-versed in a lot of different types of concepts. In the time that I've been at TJ, we've run elements of pure motion. We've run Princeton offense concepts, dribble drive motion, continuity ball screen, any number of things on the offensive end, just trying to find what's going to be successful for each individual group of kids. And this group that we have this year is very different from any group that we've coached previously. Much more size, more experience, a little bit higher skill level for the most part. And so, we can afford to do some different things with that group. And the same thing goes on the defensive end. Sometimes you're going to have a group that's going to benefit more from pressing. Sometimes you're going to benefit more from being more zone oriented. But what you can't do at a place like TJ is commit and say, we're going to do things this way, come hell or high water, and expect that you're going to be able to have success year over year.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your kids. Where do your kids come from? Now, obviously, for folks who don't know, TJ's, I guess in 86 and 87, 86 or 87, it closed as a neighborhood high school, community high school. And those kids went to Annandale, and TJ became a magnet high-tech program. And I believe it's #1 school, public school in the country. But where do you get most of your kids? There's kids from Arlington, where I used to live, that go to TJ. I believe kids from all over the northern part of the state go to TJ.
That's true. So TJ has a catchment area that spans across Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Prince William, Arlington, and the city of Falls Church. So some of the kids who would end up at Meridian, a very small number because that's a relatively smaller jurisdiction. Although some of our finest ball players have come from that area. Kids
You
like
didn't say
Spencer
Alexander.
Carr.
I'm sorry, you didn't say
No, no,
Alexander City. Okay.
no. The city of Alexandria has never participated in TJ, as
Okay.
far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Which is, it's interesting because it's right next door. It's literally, 2 miles down Little River Turnpike before it turns into Duke Street. But
I interrupted
yeah,
you, Coach. I'm sorry. You're in the middle of a story, and I interrupted you. Go back to what you were talking about.
No, it's quite all right. So yeah, those kids come from all over Northern Virginia, and it's it's really fascinating to see where they all come from. Just last year we had a freshman group. They went 12-4, 12-2 in their league, and they came from 14 different middle schools, and none of them had ever played together before. So it presents a unique challenge, but one that's very enjoyable. In some ways, it's almost like coaching an AAU team because you have kids from all over the area that are coming from different places, and you have to bring them together and figure out what's going to work and what's going to be successful with them. But one of the things that I think that helps with in a way is that the kids develop a bond with each other over sort of that shared interest and over meeting all of each other for the first time. So to me, that is a really critical element of how things work for us. In fact, the group that we have now, the class of 2024 kids, they met each other for the first time in basketball practice because they came into TJ during the pandemic. And so they were in virtual school for the first 3 months or so, and for a long time beyond that. But they had never met any of the other kids at TJ for the most part, except for some of the kids they might have gone to middle school with. And so we had that first tryout in December when we finally got started in that pandemic season. And that was the first time all of those kids had seen anybody from TJ. It was the first time they'd gotten into our building and the first time they'd connected with each other. And they really built a strong and deep bond together from that being their first experience at TJ. And that's something that I think is carried on throughout the course of our time. They've remained very, very close knit as a group. And I think that has a tangible impact on the success that we've had this year.
Yeah. Well, Coach, as you know, I do a lot of college soccer as well. And I interviewed a coach this year from Cal Poly, a guy named Frank Marino. And he said something to me that it makes sense, but I just wasn't aware of, that the academic institutions in Division III have an advantage because they have a lot of D1 level players who there's not a lot of money involved in men's soccer because they kind of save on the money in men's soccer for other programs because of Title IX. And they go to Division III because for academics. Do you often get kids that are good enough to play at Gonzaga or top institutions downtown, but because TJ is such a great school, they go to TJ? So does it ever work in your favor that it's such a great academic institution?
I wish I could say yes. The honest answer is probably not. That's if there are kids who are interested in playing at the Division I level, a lot of times they're going to choose that exposure. I think one of the reasons for that is that we have so many phenomenal schools in Northern Virginia. TJ is a tremendous opportunity, don't get me wrong. But the reality of Fairfax County and of many of the private schools in this area is that they're really excellent schools. And TJ, by no means do we have a monopoly on great academics in Northern Virginia. And so I think, a lot of kids find that they can have that opportunity, in other places as well. Certainly, I would love for that to be the case. That would be really cool. But at the same time, I think it's fairly rare nowadays that you see kids who might be ticketed for private schools who choose to come to a public school instead, and then they apply to TJ and then they get into TJ. That would be a rare bird, to say the least. Now, we've had some phenomenal players over the years, kids like Noah Barnes, Matt Marabojak. I'm obviously going to miss a few, Alex Yu, and some of the kids that we have right now that are playing very well for us. But at the same time, I think that's not something that we've necessarily benefited from. I think that our program's history might look a little different if that were the case.
Yeah. Well, we have some amazing community schools in Northern Virginia that have supported their basketball programs for generations, including Alexandria City, TC Williams, South Lakes, Hayfield, Woodson, just a great community feel, great boosters. It means so much to play for that school when you're in that community. And Grant Hill talked about this when I interviewed him. Now, obviously with TJ, you're not going to have that. Is that something that you miss out on? Do you ever wish you had that kind of feel?
I will tell you, it can be a little frustrating sometimes when you come into a home game on a Tuesday night and you've got your parents there. Our parents of our players are wonderfully supportive. They come to every game and they cheer on their kids, and they fill up the stadium with their noise. But it can be a little frustrating when we don't have our students in the stands to necessarily the same extent that you get at some other schools. But at the same time, there are nights when they come out, when it's Friday night or it's a senior night or something like that, we'll get a group of our kids in the stands. And because our gym, I don't know how much you've been in there, but it's relatively small, like many of the gyms in our league, it can get really loud. You get 50 to 100 TJ kids in that area, and you get to be a really amazing atmosphere. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a couple of games like that down the road. I know that our kids are excited to have hopefully earned a little bit more excitement about our program with some of the success that we've had just in the last couple of weeks. So I'm hoping to see a little bit more in that area, but it is a little bit of a struggle. You don't necessarily have a community of support. There aren't, TJ basketball fans who are coming to games for 20 years, who are in the stands, and they're folks that you pick out and you recognize. I would say this year we've been fortunate the last few weeks because it's been, the college break between semesters. We've had a number of our most recent alumni who have come back, kids like Sebastian Vanderbilt Fallon, Stephen Lee, Dan Nguyen, Todd Ritter, kids who, really feel strongly about the program coming back to see their buddies that they played with for a couple of years. That's been really nice to see. But yeah, you do miss out on that a little bit. But at the same time, I love the community that we have. It's a very unique community and one that I'm very proud to be a part of.
How do the academic demands affect your job? Do you have problems sometimes getting kids to commit because of the academic demands? Or, I mean, all the Fairfax County schools are tough to some degree. They can be as tough as you want them to be. So
Sure.
is that a non-issue?
No, I would say we have, the biggest difficulty we have is getting kids to commit to coming to play in the first place. So sometimes we will have kids who, maybe they're a little bit afraid to stick their toe in the water when they're freshmen because it's such a big shock from their middle school situation to, coming into TJ as a freshman, and their parents maybe want them to take a year to feel things out from an academic perspective, see if it's the right fit for them, so on and so forth, before they commit to an extracurricular. And then in some other cases, it's famously very difficult during the junior and senior year at TJ, just like it is at many schools, many of the higher academic schools here, because you're dealing with a bunch of AP classes, and your senior year, you're dealing with a ton of college applications and so on. And so it can be challenging to get them to start the season and to come to tryouts in some cases. But once they do make the commitment to do that, the kids usually stick it out, and we have pretty high standards in terms of what we expect from them in terms of balancing their academics and their basketball commitments. We feel like it's a great opportunity for these kids to learn time management, and it's something that is an absolute necessity in order to be successful in both areas at TJ. And so, for us to have those standards, and the kids, they rise to meet the level of those standards. And I think that the lessons that they get from that help them out greatly as they move on into their college life and eventually into their careers.
Yeah. How about parents? The demands that parents put on coaches, are there any different at a high academic institution like TJ than they would be at a more traditional school where, we all like to laugh at the crazy sports parents of today? But are you seeing the same thing at TJ?
I think we've been very fortunate over the course of the last, I would say, 10 to 12 years. We've had extremely supportive parents. It took a minute once, my group first came in and we started, in the position running the varsity program at TJ. But really since about, I would say, about 10, 12 years ago, we've had a phenomenal group of parents that has just sort of, they've accepted and committed to what we want to do and how we want to run the program, and the high demands that we place on the kids in terms of their attendance and their conduct and their behavior, so on and so forth. I have my own personal views of how things have gone in terms of parent behavior in the stands over the course of the last several years and how that's impacted our officiating community. But I'm very proud of the way our parents have conducted themselves over the years. I think when the kids have so many things that are deeply important to them, not just from an academic perspective, but also from an extracurricular perspective, I think that turns the temperature down a little bit on what goes on the basketball court. And our parents are very passionate. They want our kids to win. They want them to go out there and perform well. And if there's a call that they don't like, they'll be somewhat vocal about it. But we don't have situations in our program, I'm very thankful to say, where folks go over the line or really go anywhere close to the line. And, I think that's something that we've cultivated over the years. We've had a lot of really strong parent liaisons that have set a strong culture within our parent group, that we just try not to get mixed up in that stuff. And as a general rule, I think they tend to trust, if I turn around and look back and go, hey, let's cool it a little bit, because we're not helping the situation. I think they understand that and they respond reasonably well to it. So I'm very fortunate in that area.
Yeah. Well, you have a star Southwest Asian kid named Sahil Kabadia, I believe, a 6'7" big guy. Last night I was up at Marshall and they have two Asian point guards. There's a lot about the stereotype we hear that at schools, the immigrant communities are really focused on academic achievement for their kids. Very, very high test scores. I'm sure at Jefferson we see some of that as well. I'm in Loudoun County. Some of the schools, the test scores in the Asian population is both they're high and very large. Are you beginning to see the same commitment for the immigrant communities to sports? Obviously, if they come to this country, they want their kids to have all the opportunities, maybe the ones they didn't have. But are you beginning to see they have the same love and the same passion for sports as they have for academic achievement?
I think, to try to paint with a broad brush, I think is really difficult. But I think that, we certainly see individual families, individual students who choose to make that commitment. But it depends on the family. I think it's very, it's very I'm trying to struggle for the right words here. But each family is going to have their own priorities, their own commitments, their own things that they think are important. And I think we've done a pretty good job at Jefferson, not just in the basketball program, but really across our athletic program. And, led by our DSA, Dylan Forche, who's in, I think, his second or third year with us, about preaching the importance of having these other activities that these kids can take part in to blow off steam and to learn some of the lessons that are not so easy to learn in the classroom. And I think when you have the level of success in the college admissions program that our athletic programs have had, in terms of kids who commit lots of hours to their individual athletic programs that they're doing, and now they're getting into schools like Yale and Harvard and Princeton and Columbia, so on and so forth, I think that helps make the argument for why it's not only something that is important to do, but also that's advantageous for these kids to do. One of the interesting things, excuse me, about going to TJ is that many students will have greater opportunities in athletics than they might at their base school. If you're going to one of these gigantic schools, I don't want to call anything out in specific, but there are schools that will have 100 kids try out for their freshman boys basketball program. And if you don't necessarily have a great 3 days of tryouts, or you weren't on the D1 county league team the year before, it might be difficult for you to be able to get that kind of opportunity. And, for us in our situation, if you are a kid who has a significant amount of basketball experience, you might not have been the best player on your county league team, or you might not have been maybe the best player in your house league or something like that. You might still have an opportunity to play freshman basketball for us. And once you get into that situation where now you're practicing 6 days a week, you might have an opportunity to become a player of significance. And we've had a number of kids who I think would have been buried or forgotten in their base high school programs, or maybe not have had quite the same opportunities, that have been second team, first team all district players for us. Because they had the chance to come in and be relied on to play 25 minutes a game as a freshman, so on and so forth. And they have those experiences, and it helps them to maximize their potential. These are kids that, if they went to their base school, they might try out for the team, they might get cut, they might be at the end of the bench. their first year, and they might never bubble up to the varsity, but they're kids who end up having these opportunities because they chose to come to TJ.
Yeah. Well, since I'm delving into stereotypes, when you're coaching the high IQ players, and with TJ, it's you have to be pretty high IQ to even get in. So it's not even a myth. But do you coach any differently? Are there things that your kids may want to do a little bit different? I mean, some of these things you may have to do because you may feel like you don't have the talent of some of the teams in the national district, like Hayfield. But can you coach these kids and do things a little bit differently because they are TJ kids?
I think for our kids, what helps them the most is really understanding the why of what we're doing. And if we can sort of have a baseline philosophy as a whole about how we want to approach the game, then it's easier for them to sort of connect the dots and understand, okay, we're playing this particular concept for this reason to achieve this goal. And helping them contextualize the game in that manner can be really, really effective. Just last night we played Edison, and we are a program historically that that we have specific ways that we try to do each of these things. We have rules in each of our zone defenses, man-to-man offenses, so on and so forth. When you play a team like Edison that has some extremely talented kids that can really do some remarkable things with the ball in their hands, you really have to impress upon your kids that the game is going to be different based on where the ball is, who has it in their hands. And we have to make sure that our game plan is tailored to each of these specific situations. And I have to credit them. They did a wonderful job of it last night. But I think one of the great things about coaching TJ kids is they have a ton of intellectual curiosity. So if you can get them interested in the game of basketball and some of the why behind it, you start to see those light bulbs turn on as you get to this point in the season. And they start solving their own problems. And when teams of ours start solving their own problems in the course of games, when they start coming together and collaborating, which is something that they don't necessarily get a ton of before they get to TJ, then you can get to something that's truly special. So for me, this year with this group, one of the things I've tried to do is get out of the way a little bit and let them start to figure things out. Let them start to figure out how they want to get themselves ready in the first 15 minutes of practice. Let them figure out how they want to warm up, and get them talking to each other when something goes wrong in practice about why things happen the way they happened and how we can fix them using the concepts that we have in total. So that's been a thing that I've really enjoyed watching them do this year. We're fortunate to have a lot of continuity among our players. We have three kids in our starting lineup who have started nearly every game for us the last 3 seasons. And having those kids with that sort of experience and continuity, I think, makes a big difference.
Yeah. It's you can't beat the continuity, especially as you said, at a school like TJ, where it's a magnet school. Would you ever want the challenge of coaching, a talented team? So right now, generally, your challenge is to make your team competitive every year. That's how you start the year. And this year's a little bit different because this year there's expectations behind that, and you've had other years where your teams were well regarded coming in. But would you ever want the challenge of being at a top program where you have to win? Like I'm good friends with Mike Desmond, and every once in a while I talk to him, and being on top is not always so easy.
Oh yeah.
It's different. So would you ever want that challenge, or do you enjoy this challenge?
I think that's kind of a false choice. I do enjoy this challenge, but at the same time, you have to take things year over year and see what opportunities present themselves. And every year you kind of step back and you say, okay, how did that season go? What am I missing? What do I want to be able to do better as a coach? And I think there are other challenges out there that I think I would be interested in, but it would have to be the right situation. And I'm not, I'm not itching to get out by any stretch of the imagination. I love these kids. I love this program. And I think we've really built something special. We have a nice group coming up behind this group that's doing well on the JV level this year. But I think it really, as a coach, you have to continue to seek opportunities to grow and get better and to, become somebody who can do more for the programs that you're in. And so for 8 years, I coached with the Nova Cavaliers program with Jerry Lynn was, the program director at the time. And he and I are good friends and have had a positive relationship for, almost a dozen years now. And so that was really a great opportunity for me to take some things out on the open road with some really talented kids. We were able to coach with my wife, Allison, who also has a really strong basketball background. She was a manager at George Mason for Jim Larinaga right after the Final Four team came up. And she also managed for Coach Weirin, who you mentioned earlier, when she was a student at Marshall. But we coached AAU teams together that had a good amount of talent. We had kids like Greg Rousen, who's finishing up his career at University of Mary Washington. Andrew Hayden was a kid that we had on our previous year team that was with Stony Brook last year as a Division I player. And, having the opportunity to coach several other kids that ended up going on and playing Division III basketball, Jack Ferguson, Nate Roberts, Colby and Will Matheny from Dominion, and kids of that nature, that scratched some of that itch a little bit. It wasn't necessarily a situation where we had a ton of expectations, but at the same time, we had enough talent to do some things that were a little bit different than what we might necessarily do at TJ. So that's a long answer to a short question, I think. But right now I'm 38 years old, and I think there are a lot of different challenges that might be available in the future, and we'll see what happens.
No, I wasn't encouraging you to leave. I was just trying to compare the challenges. Like, for example, like Pete Carroll made an amazing career and was a true innovator. So here's a guy who, like TJ, coached at Princeton, and he was often outgunned by talent-wise, but I believe he got to at least one Final Four. And coaches at major universities with all the resources and access to talent, they were using his innovations. So here, and so that it was such a great story because John Thompson, I think, often would credit Carroll as one of the guys that taught him the most. And you probably couldn't get much different than the kind of kids that Thompson often recruited than the kids that Carroll's was able to get at Princeton.
Yeah, and it's I think that was again a guy who was uniquely tailored for that challenge and that situation, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why he's such a legend in the Ivy League. And I think that there is certainly something to be said for being able to give a very specific message to the kids that you're coaching. And I think that my hope is, being an alum of TJ, having been through some of the same things that those kids went through, granted in a much different era. But I think that gives you a certain level of credibility when you're in a situation like this one. I think to be able to coach successfully at TJ in any sport, you really have to have an understanding of what you're getting into and where these kids' priorities are and how you can try to draw those boundaries that you have with them in such a way that you still have high expectations of them as an athlete while understanding some of the things that they go through daily. And so for me, the biggest thing that I've tried to get across to these kids is that they have tremendous opportunities in front of them, and they always will for most of them. And it's incumbent upon them to make the most of those opportunities and to connect with each other to be able to maximize the gifts that they have. We've really placed a great emphasis in the last few years on doing things together and on the sort of the teamwork element of basketball. One of the fascinating things about the history of sports at TJ, and not a lot of people know this, but TJ has not just a successful but a dominant athletic history in most individual sports. So if you go into our gym, the next time you get in there, you look at the banners around the edge, almost all of the individual sports, things like track, cross country, swim and dive, tennis, TJ has 20 or 25 district championships in our 36, 37 years of existence. But most of the team sports, we've had a little bit more of a struggle with. And I don't think that is necessarily, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that is a little bit of a function of sometimes how, kids from higher academic backgrounds tend to approach sports. And you have kids who will laser focus on a subject like STEM, and at the same time they have the ability to laser focus on tennis, or they have the ability to focus on their event in swimming, so on and so forth. We have state championships in those programs. We had 7 consecutive state titles in boys tennis, but we've really tried to emphasize sort of that teamwork aspect, that collaborative aspect that's going to be so important if you're going to take what are profound and significant intellectual gifts and a strong work ethic and turn it into things that are going to make a meaningful change in society.
Yeah. Well, Coach, one of the your counterparts in the national district is Carlos Poindexter. And I've been following high school basketball since 1977 in Northern Virginia. And I would probably rank him amongst the top 5 coaches in history now. And it's funny to say that because he's still a very young guy. And we tend to honor or put the older guys that we grew up with on a pedestal. So it's very hard for us to ever see guys that are kind of our contemporaries, and Carlos is much younger than me. We don't put them on pedestals with Charlie Thompson and Don McCool. We don't. But I feel Coach Poindexter is able to relate to kids in a way some of the coaches of previous generations wouldn't. He's able to get kids, very, very talented kids, not to go to private school and to go to Hayfield, which is a very important talent in this generation if you want to try to play at that level. And Coach Carlos has a lot of respect for you. He says you're a great coach. As a guy who has to compete against him, is my analysis correct? What do you think about Coach Carlos that makes him so successful?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's the way he connects with his players. When you see, we have entered a generation now where I think a lot of kids and a lot of families aren't necessarily super enthusiastic about their kids being coached hard and being held accountable for, living up to expectations and doing what they're supposed to do on a game in, game out basis. You had a chance to watch Greg Jones over the course of the last 4 years. Now he's at American, and I understand doing very well there. And I can't tell you how many times over the, 5 or 6 times that we've played Hayfield since they entered our district that I've watched Coach Poindexter, get after his kids and get after them in a way that, shows them that he expects very, very much out of them. And these are super talented kids who, in the case of a lot of them, would have other options. If they wanted to leave, they could, but he's getting after them, and he's, like I said, holding them accountable for being where they're supposed to be and doing what they're supposed to do. And I think you have to, again, have a certain level of credibility with your players in order to be able to do that. Now, I'm not behind the scenes. I don't go to practice every day, at Hayfield. But when you see that as a coach and you see the kids, it's like that famous picture of Michael Jordan at UNC looking up at Dean Smith, right? Mm-hmm. And having that sort of total focus and that total locked in mentality. And when you see the kids' responses, they're not slinking down to the end of the bench. They're not sulking and burying their heads in the sand and having terrible body language. And I think that speaks to that relational aspect of coaching that's so important, and that it seems like Coach Poindexter has really mastered. And to have done that at such a young age, I think is really, really impressive. But he's another guy, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Hayfield graduate. And I think that makes a big difference sometimes when you're trying to communicate with these kids, that what it's like to be in that building, and you've had some of the same teachers maybe who have been around for a long time, and some of the same institutional individuals that you have relationships with that you can also sort of build on. And I guarantee you he has tremendous support within that building too. And so when the kids are going to class every day and there's sort of that community support for the institution of Hayfield basketball, I think that makes a big difference. And he's really cultivated a very, very strong following over there. A lot of people, I think, they look at 2 consecutive seasons. Quite frankly, I thought they should have gone undefeated last year. The Jackson Reed game was tough on a number of levels. And, I think you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But, when you have that level of success, it's not just about the talent, it's about what they have as a collective group, and, and how strong that program is, not just on the court, but off the court.
Yeah. Well, Coach, let's get to your team this year, because you're having a tremendous season. You're off to a great start. It's a tournament game, and I think if you knew before the season that you'd be where you are now, you'd be quite satisfied where you are. I mentioned your center, Capatier. I was trying to think who he reminds me of, and the thing I came up with is Rasheed Wallace, but not quite as quite physically imposing, but he's kind of light on his feet. He's very active. He kind of has
Yeah.
that kind of presence to me. A very intriguing player. I know you had Santi Criado, who's also a 6'5"
Mm.
kid. He had a big game last night against Edison. So your team flies under the radar a little bit, but I have a feeling that the radar is going to be found out, and people are going to start to infiltrate the dome that you build around your team. But tell us a little bit more about your team and your players, but also some of the unsung heroes.
Sure. So I would say, Sahil is a tremendous rim protector, and he's had that skill set ever since he was a sophomore. Earlier this year, he became our program's all-time leader in blocked shots. And I think, he's going to go run away and hide with that record for a few years now. He's a wonderful kid. I think as with all of our players, there are deeper stories behind each of these individual guys. And Sahil is a kid who his deepest interest is in medicine, and his hope is to use, I want to say it's data analytics and machine learning to help with cancer research.
Wow.
That's what he's hoping to do moving on. And so, he's going to be Dr. Sahil, 6'7", and, with I'm sure a wonderful bedside manner. But, he's really developed his offensive game over the years. He's developed his nose for the ball, wanting to go get rebounds. And I think maybe the biggest area where he's improved is as a communicator and as a leader. He started every game for us the last 3 years. When you have a kid that size who can be that much of a presence around the rim, it makes a big difference. But he really has become a strong leader. He's become much more mature over the course of the last couple of years. And I think he's sort of what we build a lot of our both ends of the ball, in defense and offense. We build a lot of what we do around him and the presence that he has around the rim. You mentioned Santi Criado. He might be one of the kids in our program who has improved the most from being on the varsity as a sophomore, where he was mainly just an energy guy and a good defender who got his hands on a lot of balls and just played super hard like his hair was on fire. And then, his junior year, he added some layers to his game as a scorer. And now he's a kid where, if he takes the ball to the rim, it's really hard to stop him with one guy. He gets downhill extremely well. He's become a very good playmaker off 2 feet inside the lane. And he just is very, very efficient. He's averaging a little over 17 a game now at this point. We actually did not have him the first time we played Edison in that double overtime loss. So having him in this game, I think, made that a different dimension to what we were doing. And additionally, he gives us a threat to attack pressure. So if you get up and press us in the full court, we have a couple of different ways that we try to get the ball in his hands going downhill. And he has, the ability, again, to take it right to the rim, almost coast to coast, or to be able to set up some of his teammates off the bounce. He's done a tremendous job of opening up his skill set and becoming a much better player all around. Evan Huang is another kid that we have who started for 3 years. He's actually a 4-year varsity player. He made the varsity as a freshman, but he's just a very he's sort of our quiet assassin. He's calm. He's a very cerebral player. He plays very physical. He's about 6'4" with good length and good wingspan. Has always been one of our better rebounders and can knock down a three at a pretty high clip as well. He creates a lot of matchup problems because a lot of people will spend some of their better defenders on Sahil and Santiago. And now, Evan might have a matchup where either he can take somebody down on the block if it's a smaller defender, or he can take them out on the perimeter. And we have some ISO sets that we run for him to be able to get downhill on the drive. So those 3 guys really are the backbone of the group in terms of what we rely on for scoring and rebounding, and they create a lot of matchup difficulties. The guys who are really the unsung heroes, our point guard is a kid named Mihir Kolshrestha. He wears number 5. He's a senior for us. He was unfortunately injured for most of last year, dealing with a foot issue. And I think he would have started out a little bit stronger this year if he had not had that injury. But he's come back this year. He's one of our better on-ball defenders. He serves as our point guard, getting us into what we want to do from an offensive perspective. And we do a lot of things on offense. So to be able to command what we're doing to get us into a set, call a play, that's a difficult job. And he has seen great improvement towards the backstretch of this year, I think, thanks to one of our coaches that was able to come back to us mid-season, a guy named Ian McLeod. He's a guy who has been on our staff for several years. He had to take a break for a couple of years to start his family, and he has a beautiful young daughter now. But now he's coming back. He's starting to get with us, and he's a guy. He played at St. Stephen's St. Agnes for Coach McClintock back in '09, I want to say, and he was a point guard over there in the IAC. And he's really brought another dimension to our coaching staff in terms of the one-on-one game, being a ball handler, and really having that point guard mentality in the modern game, which I think is a great thing. And then our fifth starter is a kid named Landon Gasparetti. He's a kid from Fort Belvoir, a military family down there. We're actually going down to Mount Vernon on Monday, and that's his base school. So looking forward to that opportunity. Very, very good three-point shooter, and that's what he gets the most attention for. But he's also just a really solid ball handler. He's probably our best entry passer, getting the ball into our post players. And he's one of the guys on the floor that we can really count on to not turn the ball over. He can be under pressure, and he's going to make the right play. He's going to find the open man, and he's going to go out and just make smart plays over and over and over again throughout the course of the game. Even if the three is not hitting on that particular night, he's a guy who's going to make an impact by being intelligent on both ends of the floor and knowing what we're trying to accomplish. And then I have to give a huge shout out to all of the guys on our bench. We have a couple of kids, Chetan Maviti, who comes off the bench for our big kids, Willie Henry, who comes off the bench for our guards. We have a couple of backup point guards, Akash Wudali and Himanish Nalanagulagari, long name, that have come in and spelled for minutes at certain times in the season. And those guys have really provided some good instrumental depth for us. But then, the remainder of our guys, we have a number of kids whose names nobody knows yet because they're getting close to being ready to crack the rotation. But at the same time, they've given a ton of tremendous effort in practice, and they do a great job of giving our guys a look and of helping us to game plan for individual opponents. We had one of our kids, nobody can go out there and be Teddy Morgan in practice. If they were, I guarantee you they'd be starting for me. But we have one kid, Arav Gupta, who did a tremendous job in practice of trying to simulate the way that he moves and the way that he tries to get to his spots so that we could run our game plan. And Akash, that I mentioned earlier, tried to simulate Anthony Saunders. Again, if I had an Anthony Saunders, he'd be starting. But, it's those kids and their dedication to wanting to help us with our game plan and wanting to help us get better just makes a big difference. And we have kids like Alec Riso, Anish Kandavali, Phil Margulies, Karthik Nandi, Marcus Nance, and all of these kids have their individual roles in terms of how they help us to get better as a team and as individuals. And like I said, some of those guys, one of them came off the bench as a weapon against Lewis to help us get a margin by knocking down some shots. And, those kids, those guys on the bench, they're critical to the success of our team. And I can't keep going without mentioning our coaching staff. I've had the good fortune to be at TJ for 14 years, and two guys, Mark Travis and Jake Boltersdorf, have been with me for all 14 of those years. Mark Travis was the guy, he coached me as a JV player back, forever ago. And as I said earlier, he's got a ton of experience in the area. And Jake Boltersdorf is an elementary school PE teacher. And he helps me a ton with making sure that I'm stressing the fundamentals and how to really be a teacher of the game, right? I have ideas in my head about how I want to approach the 5-on-5 concept. But Jake really helps me out with making sure that we're going through a progression in terms of teaching all of the things that we have to teach. And so when you look at those two guys and the impact that they've had on our program over the years and the consistency and continuity that we've been able to have, to me, all of that has come together this year to really give us an opportunity to have some great success.
Yeah. And Coach Travels almost won a state football championship this year over at
That's true.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'll tell you, one of the reasons why we started out a little slow is because we didn't have him.
Yeah.
We're used to having this dynamic within our coaching staff, and we were thrilled for him that they did so well. But at the same time, he missed the first 4 weeks of our season. And so we had to fold him back in and sort of, get everything together. He was able to come to practice when he could. But when you have a staff that's as tight as ours, when somebody's missing, it makes a difference.
Yeah. Next time we're going to fire that guy if he does that. Coach, I'm down to my last a couple minutes here, but I did want to get your prediction of the Occoquan. And I think things are wide open this year. I think Alexandria City looks like, and I haven't seen them on paper, probably to be the toughest team. They've been very consistent. They went toe to toe with John Marshall, which is not easy.
Yeah.
But other than that, but they haven't been killing people. Their games have been close. There are really no dominant teams in Occoquan, even though there's lots of very, very solid teams. You got to feel pretty good about your chances. I know you're taking it one game at a time, but handicap the Occoquan region from here on out.
Look, I think from top to bottom, it's been the best league in the state of Virginia, public schools, for many years now. And I don't think that's any different this year. You're talking about, a lot of teams that have a legitimate chance to win that league. It's hard to predict where the seeding is going to end out. In the region you go in, and the seeding is based on what happens in the tournament. And you have no idea how that's going to play out. So, there's 5 or 6 teams could be the 1 seed, and you kind of go from there. I told David Houston before the season, I said, my challenge for you this year is to win the district from the 7 seed, because you haven't done that. And he had a good laugh over that. But
he's got a really good team.
There's tremendous teams over there. Alexandria City, Fairfax, Woodson. We had a chance to play Fairfax early in the season. It's Coach Barbie's best shooting team. And a ton of incredible coaches over there, guys with a lot of experience and a lot of years under the helm. And it's really, I think, like I said, it's the best league in the state for a reason. You said there are no dominant teams. I might argue with you, there are a lot of dominant teams.
Yeah.
Just that when you put them in the ring with each other, they're going to bloody each other a little bit, and they're going to make each other better and tougher and so on.
Fair enough.
So, I think when our group is matched up with their group in the Occoquan region, we're going to have a big, tough battle on our hands. And I'm going to be interested to see how it all plays out. But I have a lot of faith in our guys in our league, and I think we have a lot of tremendous coaches on our side. The National is a little younger this year than it has been in recent years, and so that might be a little bit of a struggle. But really, you play any one of those teams in the Patriot District, and you're going to have a real battle on your hands. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I don't know if I would make a prediction, because I guarantee you I would lose money on it, because there's so many good teams over on that side. I think over the course of the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be digging into that a little bit more and starting to think about, okay, where might this fall out? Let me look at these guys in person. Right now, I'm just laser focused on our district and trying to finish as highly as we can over there. So looking forward to it. But I like a lot of those guys, and whoever we see in the first round of regionals, hopefully it'll be a good matchup.
Yeah. Well, Coach, this has been really great. Really enjoyed talking to you. You know tons about the game, tons about basketball in the area. Do a tremendous job. Your peers have tremendous respect. I have a last question for you, and it's a one-word answer. I had an argument with your lovely wife. What is more iconic, the Air Jordan or the Chuck Taylor? One word. You get. Oh, it could be a 2-word answer, but.
Oh man, I'm the wrong person to ask that question. I'm wearing a pair of Skechers right now. I got to go with the Jordans, just because there are so many different varieties. There are so many different ones, and they look so good. And I'm a little bit biased against the Chucks, because I sprained my ankle real bad playing ball in those once upon a time. So that's I love the look. It's so clean, it's so fresh, but for me, it's the Jordans, and that will allow me to avoid sleeping on the couch tonight.
Exactly. There's a lot to be said for keeping the peace at home. So
amen to that.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Coach, sorry, I have to run, but let's do this again down the road. Best of luck the rest of the season. I'll make sure I'll get out to at least 1 or 2 of your games from here on out. Thanks so
much for having me, Julian. Really appreciate what you're doing for Northern Virginia basketball and sports as a whole. I think it's great that we have somebody who really wants to tell those stories. And I don't want to undersell at all the impact that you've had on the amount of attention that gets paid to basketball in this area. I think it deserves a lot of attention, and I think you have a lot to do with why that's happening. So thank you so much for that. You and Chris Jolly are just making a huge difference in the way things are perceived in this area. So thank you.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say. I really appreciate it. Again, as you guys do the heavy lifting, I just get to come watch and enjoy you guys' hard work. But I do appreciate the kind words. And but definitely, Coach, let's do this again. This was great.
Looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Have a good one.
All right, you too.